Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
MIFA turns 50 tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Sally Jones-Hines, President and CEO of MIFA, along with Jeannie Danziger, a volunteer and former staffer with MIFA. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
And with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So MIFA is turning 50, and we ran into each other somewhere, and all these things are coming up, especially in the fall that you guys have, but we're previewing some of that. And as I was preparing for the show, I don't do math easily in my head maybe, and I didn't think through the fact that 50 means MIFA was born in 68, in the middle of the civil rights era, and in no small part after the assassination of King.
Right.
And that it was not, I mean, we think of MIFA now as this organization that does great work, and I think there are few, if any, people who have a negative thought about MIFA, but in its formation, there was more controversy and more risk associated with it than I had remotely understood. Talk about the formation, and we'll talk about where it's been and where it's going, but talk about that origination of MIFA.
Right. In the 1960s, there really began to be discussion, mainly in the Memphis Ministers Association, about the fact that there wasn't an avenue or a way for congregations to really be involved in the social issues that were affecting our community. Hunger and injustice and racism. So there began to be discussion and dialogue about what could make that possible. And in fact, on February 4th in 1968, the Memphis Ministers Association bought space in the Commercial Appeal to publish an article that they called An Appeal to Conscience. And what the article stated was that if you believe in God, you love your brother, and brotherhood requires actions and not just words. And that was published on February 4th, and then of course a month later, Dr. King was assassinated here in Memphis. And that was the catalyst, really, in the chaos and the panic following the assassination. The Memphis Ministers Association and really the downtown churches in that association that saw the needs every day. Those leaders, along with some community leaders, said, well, if we can't do something now, when is the time? So officially in September of 1968, the Metropolitan Interfaith Association was founded.
And you have been involved, you were a former staffer, you're a volunteer now. Talk about how you got involved in MIFA.
Was always committed to the cause, and it was very out there then. I mean, not an accepted position to have, to translate your compassion into action. It was not a usual platform at that point. And I was always in awe, aside from my compassion and concern, I was always in awe of this non-threatening, wonderful platform that encouraged everyone, very diverse ethnicity, racially, everything, to come together to change the fabric of this community, which badly needed changing. I mean, we were faced with terrible racial injustice and so many ills and poverty, and surely there were things people of good heart and good spirit and talent could do to address these things and move it forward.
And
it was so exciting to do that.
Well, and you talk about, I think now of churches nationwide, but we'll just focus on Memphis, being very involved in civic causes. And I mean, they're community centers. They are attached to schools. They do all kinds of things that are what some might call political or civically engaged. They have opinions. They promulgate all kinds of activities. But you're talking about a time when people didn't want churches to be involved that way. Church was where you went on Sunday, you kind of kept it behind closed doors, and you weren't engaged in the civic discourse and civic change.
Absolutely. In fact, everything Sally talked about in terms of this open letter, the reaction was quite negative, and essentially, as you stated it, that people should remain in the church people, synagogue people, Islamic people remain in their religious communities and leave the rest alone and let the mayor govern.
Yeah. Bill.
And so from that, 50 years later, the Metropolitan Interfaith Association, MIFA, is now an institution in and of itself from an appeal by a group of religious leaders. So Sally is diving into this problem after 50 years. Has it shown just how complex the challenges we faced then are, that they're still around today, or have they kind of taken a different form as a result of the action of 1968?
Well, I think it's both and, because I think that over 50 years, MIFA has started programs and ended programs. So as an agency and looking at problems in the community, those have shifted and changed, and some have been successful and some have not. And I think we've always been realistic about moving ahead if we need to. I think the thing that is constant and is at the core of MIFA is, of course, this sense of if we come together, we can do something to affect our community. And that really that idea of service and getting to know others, whether it's getting to know other volunteers or whether it's getting to know the person I'm delivering a meal to, that all of that is community building. So it is sort of that both and. We are all distressed, I think, to think that we still have poverty and that we still have hunger and that we still have racism. But I think the hope is that there is still a place like MIFA that wants to bring people together to address that.
Jeannie, what do you think we know collectively as a result of this about the problems of poverty and all of the other problems that were present and that are still present now? What do we know about those problems today that we didn't know in 1968 because we were so isolated from one another?
I think we know that at least we have a vehicle, and out of the diversity of all of us, we can get a strength and unity to reach individuals and not be afraid. What do we know about their issues? We know that we probably can't systemically solve everything at once, but if you narrow your focus and zero in on individuals' needs, whether at that time jobs, food deficiency, critical needs, emergency housing, you can address those situations.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm trying to picture in 1968 a group of anyone sitting around a table and saying, okay, here are all these problems we've got. Which one do we tackle first?
So exciting. So exciting that something finally was going to be done. So exciting. And maybe we didn't know how, but we were inventive and we cared and we reached out and we used contacts and we worked together and we pulled our brains to reach for the stars and do something in a creative way, but a very business-like way at the same time.
Is there still a tendency today, Sally, to say, okay, well, this is in that silo, that's in that silo, and we should leave it to them and focus maybe on something else?
Well, I think in 1968 there were fewer nonprofits, there were fewer agencies and institutions focused on issues, and of course now there are many. So I think it has been healthy to focus on things that we do best and try to to work on those issues. But we do all work together, and you know, I think in the 70s and the 80s when Jeannie was at MIFA, during the years that MIFA had VISTA volunteers, those VISTA volunteers would come back and say, well, we see this need in the community, and let's start something and let's try to affect that. And so many of those programs are still at MIFA, like Meals on Wheels, but then the Memphis Food Bank started at MIFA. And of course now it's its own standalone, vibrant agency, and it does what it does well, and it needs to be its own agency and not part of MIFA. So I think part of the change in agencies of being more focused on a mission has been a sign of the times and professionalism and
I've always admired that about MIFA, by the way, that it has the strength to let go when it's time for the other one to blossom on its own, and then concentrate on other needs that maybe need assessing and addressing. I like that. It shows a flexibility. It shows a vibrant organization that's constantly in flux.
And now, at this time, for the primary programs, I think most people would probably, the most well-known program is Meals on Wheels. So you all are serving, walk through the numbers of people that you're serving food, but it's more than just food, which is obviously critically important. Talk about Meals on Wheels for a second.
Right. We served last year over 500,000 meals to over 3,000 seniors in the community who are at the highest risk of food insecurity. And we do both the home delivered meals, that is Meals on Wheels, and we also serve at several congregate sites throughout Shelby County. And you're exactly right that the Meals on Wheels, it's that hot meal, it's nutrition, and that's important, but it's the volunteer who checks in, because so often the seniors at highest risk of food insecurity are also those who are the most isolated. They don't have family here, and the volunteer may be the only person they see that day. So it's really important. A quick story, one of our meals volunteers who's delivered for 30 years or more was delivering a meal to a client who she knows very well, and the client was distraught and said, I have a cutoff notice. My utilities are going to be cut off, and my purse was stolen yesterday. I don't have the cash that I was going to use to pay that bill. And this volunteer knew to come back to MIFA and say, how do we get these wheels in motion? And you know, by the afternoon, that was taken care of, and the senior was fine to go. So it really is more than a meal.
Yeah, and that's the other part that I think, and this may be the media, maybe us, I mean, that is underreported, that MIFA is involved with homelessness and preventing homelessness. So talk about the range of programs there in terms, not just for seniors, but for families and individuals at risk of becoming homeless. You have a whole range of things you try to do to prevent that from happening.
Really a series of interventions, all with the goal of preventing homelessness. So it may start with something like a food voucher for a family that's just struggling that month to pay for medicine and groceries and needs a little help, up to utility assistance, the same sort of thing that a mother may have to decide between medicine for her children or paying the utility bill, and MIFA can help with that. On into those families who might literally find themselves homeless, and we need to help them find permanent housing. So every year we help 3,000 or more families with utility, mortgage, and rent assistance, and then work with over 200 families in finding permanent housing.
And funding-wise, the breakdown of funding sources for MIFA, let's start with stay with the homeless part. Where does that money come from?
Well, generally MIFA is about 45% private contributions, which are generous individuals in the community and foundations and corporations, and the rest is a variety of government funding, whether it be the City of Memphis or HUD funding or Older Americans Act funding. Our family programs that I described are a higher percentage of government funding because of the HUD.
And is that the breakdown the same for the senior, the Meals on Wheels and the senior assistance?
Senior, yeah, similar.
Right.
Really similar.
And have you, I mean, not to get too political, but I mean, you're like any nonprofit. I mean, you're just every year is almost. I don't say it's a new year, but there's never enough resources, I would imagine.
Right.
And you've got all these kind of various people that you're going to foundations for funding, individual donations. But the political landscape, has that been nerve-wracking with a change in leadership in the federal government that might have different priorities or may? Have you seen impacts on your funding, and have you lost sleep over potential impacts on your
Always.
funding? Yeah.
Definitely lost sleep over potential impact. Fortunately, we have not seen too much difference yet, but it has certainly been something we have awoken to advocacy in the last couple of years, because every time that federal budget comes out, there is threat of cutting programs, and then the funds tend to get
right. Every
put
time
back
because every time there's a big budget, standoff where there's a potential shutdown, all that that's kind of what I'm thinking about. The funding for you may be tied up in that. The
right.
funding for MIFA may be tied up in that those headlines on CNN and so on.
Right.
Yeah.
So it certainly has been something that we've paid attention to and had to educate ourselves, because we had been not so concerned about that in previous years.
Bill.
Jeannie, as we talk about the 50th anniversary of MIFA, a lot of MLK 50, Martin Luther King Jr. 50th anniversary commemorations in the community, and you really can't separate the two of them. And you talked about being with some of the surviving strikers from 1968 just recently, and I think all of us in the last few months have really been impressed by these men and their stories during the strike and since the strike. So with that strike and the issues it brought to the surface, kind of being an impetus for involvement so long ago, what was kind of your impression of their role in being a catalyst for not just that strike, but beyond that strike and the activism that we've seen?
I think they had such challenges at that time that they couldn't envision any kind of role like that. Now, I think they do see that, and I think they're continuing to tell their story, number one, and hope that it will serve as an impetus for greater wage equity and better working conditions, et cetera, yeah.
And some of those men are still working for the city, are still working in sanitation services for the city, all of these years later. It's really something to think about.
Yeah, it's heart-stopping.
Yeah. So 50 years ago, the idea of religious leaders, black and white, getting together was a revolutionary idea. Today, I hear from some contemporary religious leaders that it seems like a revolutionary act to some Memphians of later generations, but that we need to break out of kind of the novelness of that and get to the problems. Do you see that as a need? Are we kind of too impressed by being in the same room with one another all these years later?
I think we've moved way forward from that. An organization like MIFA long ago took the diversity as a given and wove it into the unity of wellness for all. But no, I don't think that's an unusual thing anymore. I think that's no longer novel, although maybe there are some that would disagree with me in terms of the Islamic community that's so involved now. And
it's got to be. I mean, when you talk about the primary programs that MIFA is doing now, they are blind to faith. They are blind to color, race, religion. I mean, you're dealing with people in need of all sorts of backgrounds, right? I mean, that's a big part of it. What Vista we've mentioned a couple times, and we should go back to what Vista is and was, and how Vista, which was tell me what Vista is and was, and how its important role in forming MIFA.
VISTA stands for Volunteers in Service to America, and in 1974, MIFA got the contract for this community to host the VISTA volunteers. Gid Smith was the executive director at MIFA when that happened, and Bob Dempsey was there as well. And Memphis had a little bit different model, which I think is really interesting, in that in most communities, VISTA volunteers were eager college young graduates who would come in from other places. And in Memphis, MIFA recruited mostly educated housewives to get out in the community. And Julia Allen was the first recruiter of those VISTA volunteers. She was the wife of a Rhodes faculty member, so she recruited a lot of other Rhodes faculty wives. And one historian has written that it really legitimized social action in Memphis, because some of the substantial folks in Memphis saw that, oh, here are these white Caucasian women out doing social service. And as I said, a lot of programs, the food bank and Meals on Wheels and MIFA Transit, the Christmas store,
the job bank,
all of these things started because of these VISTA volunteers. And apparently Gid Smith would just tell someone, well, you can do this, and they would, oh, okay, and do it. But,
not sure, but we'll give it a go.
Right. As you look ahead, so to the next, we have 4 or 5 minutes left here, as you look ahead to the next 50 years, I'm thinking a big question that we could do a whole show on, but I'm curious, all your work with the homeless population trying to prevent homelessness. And homelessness is a national problem. I'm struck personally, when I'm in Seattle and in Portland, in Nashville, DC, every city I've been in the last year, I've said to numerous people, if you go to Portland, Oregon, it's a little beyond startling, the number of homeless people, and it's a national, it's a tragedy, and it's a problem, and it's all those things. I'm not trying to editorialize too much. What Sally, is the answer to that, and what works? What are the models in cities or areas that have worked that you hope MIFA can move into in terms of addressing homelessness?
MIFA deals specifically with families in homelessness, and I think what our community is, the Community Alliance for Homeless, is working on creating a similar spectrum of interventions for single homeless people. But I think what we do see working is the rapid rehousing, getting families into housing of their choosing as quickly as possible, as opposed to a transitional housing model that we used to use, where families were given services, but essentially they felt still unsettled for a couple of years. And if you can get a family into their own home where their children are not disrupted from school and moving around, it is, I think, a more effective intervention. I think what we do need in Memphis is more shelter availability for families. So that's something looking forward that is a need.
And then on the food,
training maybe too.
What was
so
that?
They more job training, so that they can sustain that independence that you have helped them settle into.
Yeah. And then on the Meals on Wheels side and the working with seniors, we have an aging population. We talk about the baby boomers are reaching retirement. So the population of seniors is only growing right now.
Right.
Do you look ahead again at the next 5 to 50 years, and does that concern you? That at a time when you never have enough resources, you all are doing this great work, but that population is probably expanding.
It is expanding. What we have been able to do in the past year is some research with Methodist Healthcare, because we had Meals on Wheels clients referred to us from the hospital. So we were able to look at their patient data and see what we knew anecdotally, that hospitals encounters reduce dramatically if a senior has regular nutrition. So I'm hopeful that knowledge can help in partnership with hospitals, with insurance companies, and helping to provide that important service for seniors that shows dramatic impact.
And just with a minute left, you have a bunch of events coming up in the fall that people can look forward to that will commemorate more officially and more celebrate the 50. Talk about some of the things that are coming up in the fall.
Yeah, so we have to kick off all these things. Our events will happen in September through early October. And we're starting with what we call community days. We have 50 congregations that are pairing together to do community service from Germantown to downtown, from South Memphis to North Memphis. All different kinds of congregations, so find out if
it might not have happened in the early days.
That's right. Find out if yours is participating. We'll unveil a historic marker close to MIFA's official birthday and have birthday cake and dignitaries. And then on October 11th, we're going to have a big party. And we'll have some inspirational speakers, but we'll also have some dancing and some fun. And it's all about looking to our past, but also looking forward to what we still need to work on and what we still hope to accomplish.
And last, for people who want to get involved, not just with the commemoration events, but just get involved with the daily, weekly work that MIFA does, what should they do?
Go to our website. That's the easiest place. We'll also be unveiling for our 50th web resource called the MIFA Center for Community, and we're going to have all kinds of resources there on how to get involved, but also on topics of interest like poverty and homelessness, and a place where people can learn.
Okay, and it's MIFA.org.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks
and thank you for
highlighting.
joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.